Greetings, new hammer, middle hammer, and old hammer folks alike. I am Old Grumpy Wolf, aka Lennon Midnight, and welcome to my How to Paint 90s Grim Bright Space Wolves tutorial. I've been beyond excited to get this done for everyone as I've had a lot of requests for it. But before we get too far into things, keep in mind this is not a get your mini done and on the tabletop in 20 minutes kind of thing. There are plenty of tutorials like that here on YouTube, and this simply isn't one of them. This tutorial is meant to help teach you how to paint something that you would keep on your shelf as a display mini. Also, one thing to keep in mind, as I've had people mention it, unfortunately I can't give you breakdowns of how much water to add to your paints for diluting them. I work on a dry palette, which is a piece of glass I've been using for over 20 years. The amount of water I add will be much different than those of you working on a wet palette. I have nothing against wet palettes, I just wasn't a fan of using one when I tried it out. I'm just kind of stuck in my ways and with what works for me. With all that said, here's a list of paints and materials that I use for the tutorial. I utilize a wide variety of paints as I prefer the behavior of certain brands' colors over others. There's no right or wrong brand of paint, just what works best for you. The two most important colors in this whole thing, though, are Army Painter War Painter, Rune Cobalt, and Frost Blue, as they mimic 80s, 90s, and 2000s Citadel Blue Gray and Space Wolves Gray exactly, the classic colors which were used to paint Space Wolves from the good old 90s. I've tested out nearly all the comparable colors from other brands, and they just don't match the classic 90s colors like the War Painter paints do. Also, a huge shout out going to Adam, Tyler, Kat, and the rest of the Army Painter US team. You guys are all awesome people, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again in October at Las Vegas Open. Anywho, if any of you have questions, feel free to DM me on my Old Grumpy Wolf Instagram account, and I will do my best to help you out. I always respond to all of my DMs, and usually very quickly too. I hope you guys enjoy the tutorial, and I'll talk to you after the video. The initial setup for starting the mini is fairly straightforward. Glue the mini to the base, take outside to shoot with Citadel White Scar Primer, bring the mini back in, and base coat. For the base coat of my Space Wolves, I use 2 or 3 very thinned out coats of AK Prussian Blue to undercoat the mini with. After the base coats are dry, I will start layering on thin coats of War Painter Rune Cobalt, covering all of the armor panels while leaving recesses between the armor plates, the AK Prussian Blue base coat. This stage also helps to create the dark blue recess shading, as well as giving the War Painter Rune Cobalt a nice cool undercoat. Once all of the armor panels are covered in War Painter Rune Cobalt, I'll mix up the first mid-tone highlight consisting of 1/3 part War Painter Frost Blue and 2/3 part Rune Cobalt. I apply this initial highlight over various armor panels, including larger areas on the legs, upper torso, and helmet, keeping each coat thinned out with water so as to create a layer glazing effect. If you think the contrast is too stark, you can dilute the mixture down and feather in layer glazes to the base coat to help them blend together. After the first mid-tone highlight is finished, I change the mixture to 2/3 part War Painter Frost Blue and 1/3 part Rune Cobalt, and I begin applying this inside of the initial mid-tone highlight. I also keep this layer fairly thinned out with water to help create a gradient effect. Again, this covers all of the armor panels and edges, but being sure to keep it smaller and inside the first mid-tone highlight. The mid-tone highlights are important as they help build a gradient leading up to the final edge highlights in the next step. Again, if the contrast is too stark, feathering in some layer glazing will help. Now that the midtones are taken care of, I can move on to edge highlighting. I do the first step using pure War Painter Frost Blue. Just like the previous step, this edge highlight is thinned out with water so as to keep the brush loaded so I can do continuous lines around the very edges of the armor panels. Keeping your paints thinned out for edge highlighting like this is important as it creates a more consistent edge line, and the brush will stay tipped much easier, as well as retaining a good amount of moisture and paint in its bulb. The final edge highlight consists of Vallejo Model Color White. This step is applied to the very edges of the armor inside of the War Painter Frost Blue highlight I just made. As I mentioned before, keeping the paint thinned out with water is important for this step as it will keep the brush tipped properly and affords you more precision when applying the final edge highlight. Once all of the highlighting is finished, I will go back through and clean up all the recessed areas and panel lining. I thin out some AK Strong Dark Blue and AK Black with water and go to work. Strong Dark Blue is a very similar color to the initial Prussian blue base coat, but has a stronger pigment in it which allows for making corrections easily. I also go through and fix the recessed black areas on the model that will be painted further down the line. If you make any mistakes with spillover, it's fairly easy to go back through and fix your highlights as War Painter Frost Blue and Vallejo Model Color White coat over dark colors with minimal trouble. For the eye lenses, I always begin with a black base coat. After the black is dry, I start painting in thinned out layers of Pro Acryl Pyrrole Red until the lens is a solid color, leaving black around the edges. For the highlights, I mix Pro Acryl Orange into my Pyrrole Red. I'll do 2 or 3 of these highlights working up to pure Pro Acryl Orange, keeping all the highlights thinned out with water. For the finishing touch, I thin out Vallejo Model Color White with water and dot the upper corners of the eye lenses. For all of the black details between the backs of the legs, the stomach pipes, face tubes, and breather fins, I'll start by picking out all of the raised surfaced areas on them with pure thinned out AK Basalt Gray. From there, I'll do a 50-50 mix of AK Basalt Gray and AK Sky Gray. The third highlight consists of pure AK Basalt Gray. A final highlight of 50-50 AK Sky Gray and Vallejo Model Color White thinned with water is applied to the very edges and high points of all the raised surfaces. The way I paint my yellows is probably the most labor-intensive thing in this entire tutorial, but bear with me as it's worth it in the end. For the chest Aquilla, it's given an undercoat of thinned out Pro Acryl Bright Ivory. Once the undercoat is dried, I will heavily thin out Citadel Aerial Yellow and apply a few coats to achieve solid coverage. Next, I thin out some Citadel Magmadroth Flame contrast paint and wash the entire yellow surface, allowing the orange to collect in the crevices. After the wash is dried, I will go through and pick out each feather with Pro Acryl Bright Ivory again. This is how I begin creating the panel lining effect between the feathers. After the bright ivory undercoating is done, I will thin out Citadel Aerial Yellow again and paint over each feather I just undercoated. Once the feathers have been recoated individually in yellow, I go back through and fix any spillover with more thinned out Magmadroth Flame. From there, I will begin mixing in Pro Acryl Bright Ivory to my Citadel Aerial Yellow and work up 2 to 3 thinned out highlights. I add a final edge highlight of pure Pro Acryl Bright Ivory to the tips of the feathers. The jewel in the chest is painted the same way as the eye lenses. Base coat over black with Pro Acryl Pyrrole Red. Highlight the bottom of the jewel by adding in and working up to pure Pro Acryl Orange. Then dot the top corner of the jewel with thinned out Vallejo Model Color White. The belt and pouches are given a base coat of AK Dark Brown. This is a thinner pigmented color, so it may take a few coats to get solid coverage. From there, I wash all the brown areas with Citadel Agrax Earthshade, focusing on getting the wash to run heavily into the recessed areas to help create panel lining. After the wash is dried, I will recoat all of the leather areas with AK Dark Brown, being careful not to spill over into any of the recessed areas. For the highlights, I mix in Vallejo Model Color Desert Yellow with the AK Dark Brown, working up 2 to 3 thinned out highlights. The final highlight is thinned out pure Vallejo Model Color Desert Yellow. Once the brown is finished, I dot the buttons on the pouches with pure thinned out Pro Acryl Bright Ivory. gold on the wolf tail talisman is undercoated in AK black, then covered in Citadel Liberator gold. Once a solid coat of gold is achieved, I will wash all of the surfaces with Citadel Agrax Earthshade, making sure it heavily collects in the recesses to give the gold detail some panel lining. Once the wash is dried, I coat over all the solid areas again with thinned out Citadel Liberator gold. I will begin highlighting the gold up by adding Citadel Stormhost Silver to the mix. I usually do 2 thinned out highlights at most, with a final edge highlight of pure Citadel Stormhost Silver. From there, I will carefully wash Citadel Agrax Earthshade back into the recesses and around the rivets again to correct any spillover and to create a subtle gradient. Once dried, I will pick out edges and rivets again in pure Citadel Stormhost Silver for the final look. The fur of the talisman is base coated with Vallejo Desert Yellow. Once a solid coat is achieved, I paint the tip of the tail with Citadel Upshati Bone. From there, I apply a wash of pure Citadel Wildwood Brown contrast paint to the base of the tail and begin pulling it down further into the fur while diluting it with water. Once the wash is dried, I begin highlighting individual fur strands, starting at the base of the tail, working toward the tip. I pick out said fur strands with thinned out Vallejo Desert Brown to Citadel Upshanti Brown to Pro-Acryl Bright Ivory and finally to Vallejo White. Heavily thinned out Vallejo Desert Yellow is carefully painted in the lighter fur recesses to help create separation in the lighter areas. For the squad's pack markings, I undercoat the knee pad with thinned out Pro-Acryl Bright Ivory. Next, I thin down Citadel Aerial Yellow and apply a few layers for my base coat. Once the yellow is dry, I will start drawing the pack markings with Pro-Acryl Pyrrole Red. I sketch 3 lines with equal distance, and from there, I begin expanding the lines out by making them into triangles. I keep the Pyrrole Red as thinned out as possible to make the sketching process easier and more controlled. Once the desired shapes are reached, I will fill in the triangles with more Pyrrole Red. Any mistakes made, I cover them and refine the triangles using thinned out Pro-Acryl Bright Ivory. I then coat over the corrections with Citadel Aerial Yellow again. After the triangles are finalized, I begin highlighting the yellow of the knee pad by mixing Pro-Acryl Bright Ivory into my Citadel Aerial Yellow. I will do 2 to 3 thinned out highlights on the yellow with a final edge highlight of Pro-Acryl Bright Ivory. The red pack markings are highlighted up by applying pure thinned out Pro-Acryl Orange Red to the larger areas, working up a few layers. Then a pure Pro-Acryl Orange edge highlight is added. I go back through after the red highlights are done and refine the edges of the triangles with thinned out Pro-Acryl Pyrrole Red. The opposite knee pad with the Wolf rune is fairly straightforward. I have a transfer sheet of different Space Wolf runes. I just picked one I liked and replicated it. I carefully draw the lines with thinned out AK black. Once the rune is drawn, I'll refine with thinned out Warpainter Runic Cobalt and Frost Blue. From there, I will reconnect any broken lines, draw the dots, and I'm finished. For my bases, I coat the tops in Citadel Elysian Green and the rims with Citadel Doom Bull Brown. The Elysian Green is a great undercoat for the flock I use. After the paint is dried, I'll go through and coat the top of the base with Gorilla Superglue. I spread the superglue around using a toothpick and my X-Acto knife. The X-Acto knife helps get the glue into tight areas and recesses around the feet very easily. Once the glue is evenly spread, I dunk my minis in my old 2000 Citadel Fine Flock and Static Flock and shake off any excess. I'll blow on the base afterwards to get rid of any leftover flock that didn't shake off. From there, I scrape any spillover from the base rim with an X-Acto knife. For For the final step, I'll repaint the rim of the base again with Citadel Doombull Brown, wait for it to dry, take the Mini outside, and shoot with a few thin coats of Citadel Midtone varnish. For my silver metallics, I first undercoat the metal areas in AK Black. Once dry, I will cover those areas with thinned out Citadel Stormhost Silver. The silver is given a fairly heavy wash made from a mix of Citadel Black Templar, Known Oil, and water. I make sure to get the wash to heavily pool in the recesses, which helps to define shapes and shadows. After the wash dries, I go back through the metallic areas and stipple on or refine hard edges with more thinned out Citadel Stormhost Silver until I like how things look. Any recess shading that needs fixing, I'll thin out AK Black and apply where needed. For the arms and backpack, everything shown here is just repeated from earlier in the video, even the pack markings on the shoulder pad. Take your time with the smaller bits and be sure to pay attention to all the details just as you would on the body portion of the miniature. The bolt pistol is undercoated in Vallejo Model Color White, base coated with Pro Acryl Pyro Red, and highlighted up using Pro Acryl Orange Red, mixing up to pure Pro Acryl Orange. This was my first time ever painting the triangle pattern on a chainsword. I reference examples done by friends of mine on Instagram, namely Warheezy and Goblin Green 2021. I sketched the triangles into place using Pro Acryl Bright Ivory and AK Black. Once the triangles were refined and ready to go, I coated over the ivory in Citadel Aerial Yellow and highlighted it up to pure Pro Acryl Bright Ivory. The black areas were painted using the same methods shown earlier in the video. The chapter badge transfer and shoulder pad are coated in microsol. I slide the transfer off the paper and onto the shoulder pad with a brush, position correctly, and dab off excess microsol with a cotton swab. Once dry, I'll apply a thin layer of microset afterwards and let the transfer dry out again. Post-drying, I'll go through with AK Basalt Gray and Sky Gray to add small highlights at the edges of the wolf's head and fur. With everything complete, it's time to assemble the Mini. After giving the varnish a good 15 minutes to dry, I dab on Gorilla Super Glue where any part needs to go on the model, hold in place until set, and move on to the next piece. Once everything is set up, I take the Mini outside for one last thin coat of Citadel Midtone varnish to get everything consistent looking. And here we are, a very dapper and rather snazzy looking 1990s Grim Bright Space Wolf. So there you have it, the steps and methods I take to paint my 90s Grim Bright Space Wolves. I genuinely hope this tutorial helped you all in some way or another. It's an absolute honor, though an exhausting one, to make these tutorials for you all. 90s Grim Bright is how I've been painting for 30 odd years now, and I love being able to share my knowledge with other people through modern means like YouTube. If you would, please like this video, share it with other Space Wolf fans, and give my channel a follow. It helps guys like me a lot. Also, be sure to check out my minibar podcasts. They're specifically geared toward the painting and hobby side of things, and I've had some absolutely amazing guests on the show so far. I release new episodes every other Tuesday, and at the posting of this video, the next 2 episodes in the minibar debuting will be with Adrian 80 Wood from 90s GW and White Dwarf, and Tim Prow from 1990s Heavy Metal Team. Tim is the person who painted all the original early box art minis from 2nd edition 40K. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll have more tutorials coming soon. I'm planning on doing one for Ultramarines and another for Dark Angels in the coming months, but until then, I'll talk to you guys soon.